Welcome to the Level Set. I am joined this morning by Dr. Charles Alexander. I'm Larry Fields. We have a couple of issues that we'd like to tend to. We're going to be somewhat at a disadvantage, but at an advantage at the same time. Every now and then, our senior inspiration, our seasoned inspiration, uh, needs to go into load management. And this morning, it looks like Mike Jones is going to go into load management, and hopefully, we'll be joined later on by during Christmas. But at that point, you get to see uh, some of the things that the team needs to work on in the playoffs without your seasoned individuals. And so, when we're all back together, going stronger. But we want to lead this morning as we embark on honoring the life and works of Dr. Martin Luther King with a couple of short readings that, number one, add foundation and legs to comments that Dr. Alexander has been making the last couple of weeks in terms of the strength of an empire that our community is confronted with. Dr. Alexander has made the statement that this empire is so strong and is so willing that it topples governments. And oftentimes, when you hear these things, you do not put them in a proper context because we like to assume that those are things that were done in the past. Well, that's not the case. This is an ongoing, that statement that made by Dr. Alexander is an ongoing initiative that occurs not just geopolitically, but locally as well. So I'm going to read passages some of the books that I found to be quite interesting. The corporate coup, which is Venezuela and the end of the U.S. empire as a title. It was by Anya Param, Parampil. It's a nice little piece. But I want to go to page 165. Uh, and it reads as follows: where covert U.S. backed insurrections are concerned, USAID's Office of Transition Initiatives, OTI, is ubiquitous, aptly named to describe its mission to foment transitions and independent foreign governments. USAID established its global OTI in 1994. According to USAID's website, the OTI supports U.S. foreign policy objectives by providing assistance targeted at key political transition and stabilization needs. Through its international offices and sponsors over 1,700 activities around the world each year. In other words, the OTI was tasked with financing and grooming nominally non-governmental organizations and media outlets aligned with Washington's interests abroad, operating under the guise of organic grassroots movements. OTI's partners ultimately serve as the State Department's street muscle in foreign capitals, leading anti-government protest campaigns from Damascus to Kyiv. 4 months following Washington's unsuccessful April 2002 attempt to force a transition, in quotes, in Venezuela, USAID opened an OTI branch in Caracas and began doling out U.S. tax dollars to groups it hoped could finish the job. To identify organizations fit for the task, the OTI contracted Developmental Alternatives Incorporated, a private DC-based firm that routinely rakes in hefty federal contracts from the State Department and Pentagon. Leading DAI's Venezuela team was none other than Vigio's former Georgetown roommate, Antonio Escambo. As luck would have it, the OTI quickly selected Vigio's organizations, Oyanda Activia, as one of the first beneficiaries of the multi-million dollar initiative in Caracas, granting it $76,900 in 2003 alone. And I'll stop there. But does that point resonate, Doc?
Absolutely.
Okay. And now let me read one piece that King stated back in 1967. And I will not go into depth because I could read this whole speech out. This is the speech from The Greatest Hope for World Peace, Statements by Dr. Martin Luther King, prepared for Red Book magazine in November 5th, 1964. Here's what he states. President Truman felt then that Vietnamese peoples were not ready for independence. And we again fell victim to the deadly Western arrogance that has poisoned the international atmosphere for so long. With that tragic decision, we rejected a revolutionary government seeking self-determination and a government that had been established not by China, for whom the Vietnamese had no great love, but by clearly indigenous forces that included some communists. For 9 years following 1945, we denied the people of Vietnam the right to independence. For 9 years, we vigorously supported the French and in their abortive effort to recolonize Vietnam. Before the end of the war, we were meeting 80% of the French's war costs. Even before the French were defeated and deemed being through, they began to despair of their reckless action. But we did not. We encouraged them with our huge financial and military supplies to continue the war, even after they had lost the will. That's from it in a single garment of destiny, a book of Dr. Martin Luther King's speeches. But Doc, when you hear those things, what comes to mind?
That this is that place. This was it is what it always was. So, the only thing different is that so what I mean is the Britons were an expansionist, entity, an expansionist government. So they created this this North American project, this colonial project. They came and they began to murder and displace the indigenous population. The people that they sent over here ultimately overthrew them. And it has continued to be that type of that's really been the ethos, you know, from the beginning of this. And so many of these things that we celebrate, we do so out of context. The Alamo, that was an expansionist move to take land from Mexico. So that's why there was a fight there, because this burgeoning United States was in a land grab, right? And so, and this stuff is all over the place. So why don't the Iranians like us? Because United States overthrew the president, I think in '54, right? This is what this place does, and I know it because the facts are just too clear not to know that in the midst of our struggle, we don't understand who or really appreciate who we are struggling with. These ain't just hick country white boys with no teeth. This is a this is an inborn and innate level of aggression and self-centeredness, and I mean, really, I just not much more to say than beyond that. I mean, this, and again, like if perhaps going forward, we may need to do, because I referenced the two cradle theory, I think either last week or the week before, referencing Diop. I mean, we might need to do a real deep dive into that and do so, in with a comparative narrative showing how those characteristics of the northern cradle, and fundamentally.
Doc, if you could briefly explain that again today for those that may not have caught the prior show.
Yeah. So in short, Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop proposes a two-cradle theory. And so we know that the origins of man, or in the southern cradle, that being Africa, right? After successive migrations out of Africa, there was a period where some Africans got caught behind or got caught in what becomes the northern cradle. They get caught in what has become Europe by a glacial period. And so over the course of thousands of years, not 8,000, but thousands of years, 20, 30, 40,000 years in the process of accommodation, a change and being able to respond to the climatic issues. One of the fundamental things that had to occur was a lightening of the skin, because there was less sunlight, in this harsh period. And so white folks kind of evolved out of Black folks because of harsh climatic conditions. And our skin and that low light, that low sunlight over the course of those years, again, 20, 30, 40,000 years of progressive lightening of the skin was necessary because our bodies weren't able to produce vitamin D. Right? And so over that time, what emerges is a white people, and this is just biology working, biology and the combination of the climatic conditions. And so, but this people emerge in a harsh environment, right? So they have limited resources. And so it is, you literally eat what you hunt, right? And I imagine that sometimes when your hunt ain't ain't what you need, you take what you want, right? And so they literally, develop this kind of isolationist and aggressive type of being, and they become very insular and ultimately hostile to other. Hence, I think like maybe the most fundamental characteristic that Diop lays out is that they are xenophobic. They don't like other. Whoever other is, they don't like, right? But again, that kind of comes from this harsh environment. Their concepts of God are harsh and mean and aggressive. So like again, and we celebrate, this Marvel comic universe, right? And out of that we get Thor, right? Thor is a god of war. He's a real god. That's a real God image.
Every single one of those mythological gods are real images.
Yes, and so
Zeus and all. Zeus from
yes,
Zeus on down.
yes, and they all have that kind of nature about them. They it's that warrior culture, right? And so it's very individual. It's very hostile and aggressive, right? And so that's the northern cradle, right? That's what becomes the northern cradle, and that as what has become their ethos as compared to the southern cradle, collective, cooperative, a benign and giving God, right? Direct opposite, xenophile. We like everybody. In fact, we like too many people, right? And so that on the other extreme also can be harmful, right? And in when the xenophile and the xenophobe came in contact, it ultimately wasn't good for the xenophile, right? And so, this is this is kind of what we see, and and history kind of dictates that you know there's strong um, corollaries between the two cradle theory and how history has played out.
It's sort of a scarcity, one born out of scarcity and one born out of abundance.
Correct.
And that is those are two totally different transactions, and actually uh, cultural. Those are two totally different cultural um, frameworks. And I tell you, there are very few things as violent as scarcity, real scarcity. And I mean, and they understand that, and that's why a lot of that is really what their goal is around the globe, including in the Black community. When as we honor our Morehouse brother, Dr. King, and this weekend, one thing he was about was a universal income in the United States, because he understands it. He understood the violence of poverty, and not just that, but access to employment and other financial aids. So this is and that's the exact same game that is played geopolitically. The goal is to get the IMF involved, in these places that we want to do business. We will, laden these individuals with debt that we know they won't be able to pay. And the strings attached to these funds are you are going to hire the contractors that you take. And you're going to provide infrastructure. Now, this isn't anything I'm looking at. You don't. I mean, if you want a real um, format for this, just read the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He lays it out clearly in terms of what the actual goal is. And the goal is to laden these countries with debt when they can't pay their debt. What happens? You got to let us in and get those resources. And what happens in every single situation is they understand that the individuals that we're going to leave in charge of these funds, there will be mass corruption, not necessarily because these people are weak, but we're going to encourage the corruption. We're going to encourage that, you put a certain number of pounds in the Swiss banks, and the people at the bottom will receive nothing. And that's the way we want it, because when we come to extract those resources, we're going to need cheap labor. And that's the same game that's been played in our community. The biggest export that we have is cheap labor. That's the biggest export we provide to the United States.
And that's why we're vulnerable, and that's why the bag matters, right? And so it's, we're easily compromised because of the economics of this place, and the economics of this place are predicated on a social dynamic that's predicated upon xenophobia, i.e., white supremacy, and racism. And so, um, naturally there has to be, in order for the system to function, as smoothly as it can, there has to be X amount of us's, right? Because we end up holding the status quo, right? So there has to be some upward mobility of a segment of the Black population, in order to quell unrest,
The
right?
petty bourgeois class.
And so, and this is not this is not some new formulation of this. And so when you throw in that particular term, the petty bourgeois, then that takes us back to E. Franklin Frazier's, Black Bourgeoisie, and it's like, this was a critique, in the, in the 40s, probably before then, right? That it was already clear that, that there were these class distinctions amongst us, but not really predicated on any, real wealth or resources. All these people primarily were federal employees. That's who they were, because that's what existed. I mean, certainly there were a few, clearly there were Black entrepreneurs. We know that, but we tend to overstate the existence and the collective impact. Even like now, so. The brother in St. Louis, and then the brother who gave, the money, the brother that gave the money, to Morehouse, those two guys go back and forth in terms of being, the richest Black men, in the United States, so they Dave Stewart and what's the other brother's name? Smith.
Yeah, Robert Smith.
Robert Smith. And so they go back and forth in terms of who has the most billions, right? But, for as good as the record is, I think we have 11 billionaires, right? If what the public record is, if the public record is correct, we have 11 billionaires, right? They collectively have about $35 billion, right? That's less than a quarter of what Elon Musk has by himself. It's a fraction of what the top 10 or 15 white billionaires individually have. It's a third of the richest white woman's empire. I think the richest white woman is worth 100 billion. Our guys, our ladies and gentlemen got 35 billion together, right? So when we look at this individual wealth, and then we come, and then you look at that in the context of this, aggressive and expansionist government. This is the place that we're in, right? So we have limited resources relative to them. And we get caught up in that other thing always. If you look at all of the money we got, we'd be like the ninth, largest country. Well, but we ain't. So I no need to look at it like that. And we got the money that we got because it's in the context of this thing. And so you can't carve us out and place us somewhere else, because those resources are going to stay here. We can't, so it doesn't really make sense to make that comparison unless you're just talking about purely quality of life. Now, if you're talking about quality of life, that also kind of changes some of the narratives that we also harbor. Like, who got it harder than the Black man in America? Well, I would say that the Native American man got it harder than the Black man. I mean, I don't think there's a single statistic, in terms, I don't think there's a single statistic, favorable statistic, that the Native American population, does better than, that's a hard life, right? But again, we get that wrong because, they getting them casinos. Well, no, all nations don't get casinos, right? And then even those nations, even the nations that get casinos, that get these gaming contracts, not all of them, you know, those situations are tricky too. Like the whole nation don't always benefit because some of those people are compromised also, right? And so you end up, with people having, these cliques of people having resources that they're not sharing with everybody else. Now, the other part of that is that this wasn't just some, like this gaming phenomenon. This just wasn't something that was like they ain't just good at gaming. Like this ain't just something that they done kind of come up with some scheme. This is a part of the United States government negotiating with a sovereign entity that that we could that the collection of Native American nations are considered. They're considered a sovereign entity. So they're not negotiating with them, in terms of land and mineral rights and fishing rights. All of that stuff is still under attack. Those are constant negotiations. And, but one of the things that I think was hammered out in the history of these contentious relationships between literally the cowboys and the Indians were these gaming pieces, right? And so that's how we get to that. And so, but I only bring them up because again, we get confused about what all of this means, about what it means for us to be here, and the implications of being here, and what it looks like, and why it looks that way. And so we, from kind of a like we're literally community organizations fighting against a world power. We be thinking we just fighting, some little country toothless white man. We are literally interest groups fighting against, the most powerful military and hence paramilitary forces the world has ever seen.
Amos Wilson used to, Dr. Amos Wilson used to state all the time, you can't fight for black folks on the weekends only. The person that you're fighting, you don't even have an office, and you fight for them on the weekends.
I mean, really, and it's
You're
like
outmatched. You're outmatched.
you are outnumbered, outgunned at all times. That is the nature of this fight. And so certainly there have been times where we've had to take up arms and, to defend ourselves. But Red Summer happened, right? Springfield happened. Springfield, Illinois, and Springfield, Missouri. They happened. Pierce City, Missouri happened, right? Rosewood happened. Tulsa happened. Wilmington, North Carolina happened. All of these places, that white folks literally made go away. There is a town at the bottom of Lake Lanier in North Georgia. When we were at Morehouse and we went and marched on Forsyth, that used to be a black town. That's why we were marching, because white folks had run black folks out of there, by that time, about 30 or 40 years prior. And we were marching in Forsyth County for residential rights. This was 87, right? And so, but we like even in that Forsyth piece, we think we just marching against the Klan because they was there. And I mean, that was the interesting thing about that march is that, you know, when you got to the end, our rally on the right, and then the Klan rally on the left. And so, you know, we kind of have that unique distinction of Black folks who've been able to go to a Klan rally and live to tell about it, right? And so, but we tend to think that that is the nature of the fight, the Klan, right? That's just a part of the fight. That's just a part of the manifestation of this white supremacy. The thing is the government, state, local, you know, federal. That's the thing, and that's the thing that we have. And so it's the unified force. You know, that's what white nationalism looks like here. It's the government, and we're vulnerable because we don't read white Christian nationalism well, right? And so we don't understand that Nazism and the Klan are both white Christian nationalist organizations, right? We don't understand that essentially the United States government is the same.
That's correct.
And so if any of those people say anything about the church or Jesus, then we're likely to be like, oh my gosh, man of God. Right. And so we're either we're defenseless in that context.
And there's a whole body of law. It's called affinity clause with that we oftentimes only use when there has been some sort of Ponzi scheme associated with it. But the whole framework is affinity clause. And it is enough to make the average one in our community do the strangest things against your interests. The absolute strangest thing.
Right. And so for us, that is, you know, and this kind of go this kind of gets to, you know, Malcolm, you know, what's the matter, boss? We sick, right? That
right.
As goes this thing, as goes us. And so then we end up, whoever is this thing's enemy becomes our enemy, right? And so we either don't understand or don't care when this thing is aggressing against people of color. So, i.e., your example with, you know, what you just read about Dr. King and, you know, his critique of the Vietnam War. His critique of the Vietnam War is the same critique that Malcolm had of the Vietnam War. It's the same critique that Ali had of the Vietnam War. It's the same critique that Stokely Carmichael and you know, and much of SNCC leadership had, and then ultimately the Black Panthers had of the Vietnam War. And that is that they were sending a disproportionate amount of Black men over there to fight against people of color who were only fighting for their freedom. And in fact, had sought the assistance. Chairman Ho wrote a constitution fashioned out of the United States, you know, Constitution, sought assistance from the U.S. in getting rid of the French. The U.S. aligned themselves with the French, just like the U.S. aligned them. So it aligned itself with the French during the Vietnam War, just like it aligned itself with the French during the Haitian Revolution. And and because both of those black those persons of color were being bad actors, you have this legacy of, you know, you have this legacy of contentious behavior and aggressive behavior. Haiti looks the way it looks because of the Haitian Revolution, right? But we over-identify with the aggressor, which is, again, that's a trauma response. And so, and we even get into the same kind of arguments that if you read the literature of the enslaved, and you ain't even got to, everybody ain't comfortable with it, but it's part of our legacy. It's part of what we come from. And so if you ain't inclined to read all of it, just read Frederick Douglass. Read all of it. Read all of Frederick Douglass. It gives you about as good as understanding of what that thing was as anything, right? But whether it be him, or if you're able to dabble in other things, and you start to hear, like what the life was of an enslaved African, and the kind of things that they would discuss. One of those things that they would discuss was who had the best master. Our master better than your master, right? We do that same thing now. Like, we literally believe, go to France, is better over there because, they treat you like da-da-da-da. No, it ain't better.
Right.
French don't like black people either. And over in Britain, in England, is it? No, it ain't better. You might not feel it because you're visiting, or even if you're an expat, you're known as an expat. You're known, you move. You're able to move around because you're a United States citizen, or you're acknowledged as an American. That's why you're able to move around. But the black person who lives in France and lives in England probably lives where black people live in France and England, and they probably live in some kind of ghetto, right? But we don't understand those things, and so we don't understand that we are fighting. We are living in the belly of a global militaristic power that doesn't like people, let alone black people and other people of color. It don't like people. Now, we can kind of parcel that out if we need to, but the fact of it is, it's an aggressive entity because that's who they are. That's why the United States right now, like, why would the United States push Ukraine into a war? So we say that Russia is the worst thing in the world, right? They are a superpower. They're supposed to be like the United States government's biggest, existential threat. If that is the case, why is little old Ukraine? So it can't be both. It can't be that Russia is this major threat, yet somehow or another Ukraine is going to be able to fight, right? So we got the United States in this proxy war with Russia, and you got Ukrainians getting destroyed, and you got the world blaming Russia. Russia said before this thing started a million times, if you bring NATO to my boundary, it's going to be a problem. You try to flank me with NATO. The whole reason NATO exists is to ward off, USSR and now Russia. That's why it even exists. So to try to bring the Ukraine into NATO is in fact an aggressive militaristic move. So it was.
That,
It's this. This is the U.S. The U.S. provoked this. But if you don't understand that, you're vulnerable to believe. But it's easy. It's easy not to understand that. Okay, because Russia is the United States enemy. Now, why does that matter to this conversation that we're having about Dr. King? Because we're celebrating this weekend because Dr. King was born on the 15th, and so his birthday is usually on this Monday, and so we're taking a look at all things that happened between his actual birthday and the day at which his birthday is celebrated, right? So, and because of that, you read what you read, and that got us kind of to that Vietnam space, right? And in that Vietnam space, we see how the United States picked, and we see how we were impacted by that. And we ended up fighting. We were like a colonial. We look like a colonial army. So like the colonial armies are built on the colonized. The colonized go fight for the empire, for the colony. That's what happened to us. In terms of that's who was primarily, at least disproportionately employed in Vietnam, right? So, what similar types of events have occurred that help us to put this thing that we call the United States into proper context? Well, so on January 17th, I think 61, United States assassinated, or at least participated in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba.
Patrice Lumumba. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what did Patrice Lumumba do? He helped to, free his people from colonial rule, right? So Belgium and probably some French too. But when he asked the United States for some assistance for the development of his fledgling government, they said no. So what did he do? He went to Russia. So he's already a socialist, and now you're going to Russia, well, now you're an enemy because you're communist. And so the United States killed him and installed a dictator. Right? And so that was, I think, January 17th, like 60 or 61. Right? Now, that's also important when we look at, both Patterson and we charge genocide, and also with Malcolm's efforts to go to the United Nations. This is that environment, right? So when Patterson is charging genocide, there is no black representation, in the United Nations at that time. Because everything was still colonized, right? Unless maybe, I suppose, I have to look at it to see if Ethiopia was a part of the initial formation, of either the League of Nations or the United Nations. But even so, that's one, right? So even if it was, that's a grand total of one, right? And so they were charging genocide to a bunch of genociders, right? So this is that thing. These are these places that we don't quite, these things we don't quite understand. So then Malcolm goes, right? Now when Malcolm goes, we have, well, Lumumba has already been assassinated, right? We still have, we have Ghana, we still have Nkrumah, and so we still have, and we have, some other fledgling African states, but, our nations, but they were still literally tied to their former colonial power. So they had limited ability to be able to respond, to Malcolm. Similarly, if you read about, if you read about Garvey's efforts, um, and how they were thwarted by the United States government and his efforts to, to connect with Liberia and Sierra Leone, that the United States, influenced those governments not to deal with Marcus Garvey, right? And so we have to look at the fact, we have to look at and understand, like we literally have to study our relationship as subjects to this international militaristic global power, right? But that we not just fighting some dude that live in the boot hill. That is not what this is, right? And so, another example, Maurice Bishop in Grenada, socialist, so they already don't like him. I believe, again, sought some assistance from the US. The US said no. He gets it from Cuba. Builds this war. Cuba helps him to build, Castro helps him to build this airstrip. Now, and this example matters because this example looks like what is going on in Russia. And in the Ukraine. And this is why I'll be trying to figure out, I ain't even trying to figure out. This is how I know that we don't process information well. We meaning Black folks, right? X number of us don't even know that Maurice Bishop in Grenada ever existed. So that's problem number one. But problem number two is that the United States murdered Maurice Bishop and overthrew Grenada because they thought that Maurice Bishop was bringing communism and the communist threat to his back door. So they killed him, right? But that's why Russia is stomping the Ukraine. Because you brought NATO to Russia's back door, right? And so, but that's what this place does. It does these crazy things. And then through the use of propaganda and murder, it has a way of changing people's minds. And who are most vulnerable? The most vulnerable. That's who's the most vulnerable. And who's the most vulnerable? We are among the most vulnerable. And so when these things occur, we're not always able to put the pieces together. When Dr. King is making an all-out assault on the Vietnam War, we're not really understanding the significance of that in this place, in that place and time. We're not necessarily understanding why and how that his team was already mad at him. And they talk about, his team didn't, they were getting frustrated with him in the Poor People's Campaign. They was already mad at him. They were mad at him because he was speaking out against, there was internal conflict within his team about his stance on the war because they thought it was going to upset his relationship with this thing. So i.e. the President Johnson, right? And so if we don't understand these dynamics, it impacts our ability to like literally function, because we get into these, fantasies about what we could and should do, and what we could have or would have done had we been at some other point. So if I was back then, I wouldn't have been you'd have been in the same foolishness that people was in then, because that's what this thing has for us. And so our best defense is to learn as much of this stuff as possible, because that's another one of those things we say all the time. If you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it, which is true, but I'm not sure that we believe it, because I don't know enough of us embrace it. Learn and understand our history so that we can have the proper understanding of our current context and our future potentials. Right? That's kind of what we got to do. So, so that was one example of this place doing what this place does. But another example, an earlier example, that occurs at about the time that, this is, so while we are in, in the nadir, right? So we're in that space between the end of Reconstruction and, whatever we may call the onset of the modern civil rights movement. What's significant at that time? So if we figure Booker T. Washington, let's say. So Booker T. Washington in 1895, and the Cotton Exposition, the Georgia Cotton Exposition, and he gives the speech that people keep saying gave white folks license to do what white. I mean, the argument against this don't even make sense. Booker T, co-signed that white folks could be white. No, that's not what he did. He said a simple fact. First of all, if you read it, it's pretty clear Booker T is a separatist. Booker T said, in all things self and all things social, we can be separate. But in business and, probably some other political things, we could be as one, which literally makes sense. And he's telling white folks to spend your money, with Black folks, buy from Black folks, and hire Black folks. That's what he's telling them. And he's telling Black folks to do the same. Why is that contextually even important? Because the United States was importing white labor. There's a context for that speech. But we simple, so we don't really understand, right? But I just wanted to give some context for this next piece. So we're fighting, in 1890s. So what else is Booker T doing other than allegedly telling white folks that it's okay to be white folks? He's also funding.
Oh, Tuskegee.
He's absolutely funding Tuskegee, which is why he has this unique relationship with Black folks, because Black folks didn't have the money to fund Tuskegee.
Right.
Right? So
And behind the scenes, a number of initiatives that
that
are contrary to the popular tropes that are associated with them to this day.
that's where I was going with this. And so some of that money he's raising for Tuskegee, he's also using to fund legal battles across the South. He's also engaged the owners. I forget the name this guy's name, but the guy, the owner of Sears and Roebuck, to build these schools all across the South. Right. So he's doing all of that. Right. So why is this important? So while we are literally amongst whatever our Black leadership, whoever it was composed of at that point, Booker T, Monroe Trotter, all these other guys arguing back and forth with each other, and mad at Booker T. So while we're fighting for civil rights and social rights and economic rights, in the 1890s, the United States government is annexing and taking Hawaii. The last Hawaiian monarchy, the Queen, was overthrown January 17, 1893. Military force lands on the island. She's deposed, overthrown. White man put in place running, Hawaii. At some point, Hawaii becomes a state. That's this thing. That's what we're fighting. That's what we're fighting. And we have to be thinking about this stuff all of the time. And we keep thinking we fighting that dude with no teeth that live, don't go to Oakville, right? Oakville. So South St. Louis. These are just extensions of this thing. We are literally in the belly of the beast. And that we exist at all in the manner in which we exist there, to some degree is really kind of remarkable. This thing make people disappear.
Miraculous, actually. We're all miracles.
This thing makes people disappear. It is very clear from the record that the United States government was involved in the murder of Malcolm. It's very clear from the record that the United States government was involved in the murder of Dr. King. This is what this thing does. The United States killed Patrice Lumumba. The United States killed Maurice Bishop. The United States overthrew the Queen of Hawaii. That's what. So it can't be crazy that Trump is talking about Greenland, because this is what the United States does.
That is correct, sir. That is correct. And they could use the popular to offset some of the deficiencies that might be in the voter rolls as the demographics turn. They would love to have that, most of that. So these things cannot be looked at in a vacuum. You need to look at it with the same framework that you just laid out. And, this, we think that these blasé hip hoppers, or I won't even call them that, but rappers, are coming up with something new, as being to say, get down, lay down or get down. Lay down or get down has been the anthem of this regime from the beginning.
Yes.
This is it, baby. Lay down or get down. That's it.
Yes, and so this fight that we are fighting on a day to day is literally against the world, the preeminent world power. That is the nature of that is our enemy, right? And so, like, our piece is to figure out how we carve out you know, our niche. Now, the problem that we've identified here is that because of, and this is another example of the disparity. If so one way to look at it is, as I started, the 35 billion that our richest folks have versus, they richest folks. So that's one way to look at the disparity. The other way to look at the disparity is how vulnerable folks who are allegedly, Black leaders are to the dollar, right? And so,
I think vulnerable is a step up to where they are. I think, you're vulnerable to something when you have a baseline to operate in its absence. But these dollars are foundational for these guys. It's all they have. So they are wholly owned at this point. And I have not seen any that are not wholly owned in a long time that would assert anything different.
we have an elected leadership class that is beholden to Israel.
Absolutely.
That
Absolutely.
cannot be in our interest. But we struggle to understand those social political dynamics because Hakeem Jeffries, spit some Biggie raps in front of Congress, right? He with us, right? He with us. He not with us. He's with them.
I
I
think
mean,
Israel
his
only
run was problematic, really, kind of to start with. He intentionally ran where he ran, and so he knew he was going to have to be beholden to Jewish interests. And I don't have a problem with being beholden to the Jewish interests in New York, right? So at the commute, so I don't have a problem with him being tending to the interests of his constituency, whoever his constituency is. But in this situation, we see how this goes. He's a U.S. senator. He's not a state senator, right? So as a U.S. senator, and even if he were a state senator, he will ultimately end up in the same situation. But as a U.S. senator, he has some international diplomatic responsibilities. And because he represents who he represents, those responsibilities dictate that, he lean in favor of Israel. So here we have it again. What's the matter, boss? We sit. So you have him in alignment with the destruction of Palestine. He's just as likely as any of these other clowns to say that Israel has a right to defend itself when Israel is in fact the aggressor. And
you
this
know,
is
and that's what let me read from once again, regarding Dr. King from in a single garment of destiny. The statement by King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Middle East question, is among the most interesting documents in part five of this book, in part because it speaks to the timelessness of certain concerns raised by King with respect to world peace. This statement, which was set forth at the Chicago Conference of New Politics in September of 1967, expressed King's views on how the violent conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians might thus be resolved. Philip King and his associates were concerned not only about the security of the state of Israel and its right to exist, but also about the imposed state of poverty and backwardness that afflicted the Palestinians and the Arab world as a whole. And King's judgment to Israeli-Palestine conflict was one of the greatest threats to global peace efforts.
Was and it is, right? And
Okay,
and
Doc.
and so and that's we had so like at the beginning of this conflict, and even before this conflict, it just was not uncommon to sit and talk with Black folks who, were baffled. Why did Palestinians keep messing with Israel? Palestinians ain't messing with Israel. The Palestinians are trying to survive. Israel is the aggressor. That's what occupation means. So,
It literally means I'm going to come and take your house and dare you to
yes,
say a damn thing about it.
which
They
is
are so,
literally what they do. They
yeah,
literally go house to house and take people's property. They take the house, they take the goats, they take
the
the
gardens,
vegetation, they take it
the,
all.
uh, they have, I mean, and Ta-Nehisi Coates' recent book, The Message, he
Message.
speaks, he speaks on how they watch the Palestinians create an olive grove, brought in horticulturalists, and and dug up that grove and replanted it on the Israeli side after it reached a level of maturity. And and uh, the rationale of your day, the reality of your day is that when you leave home in the morning, you do not know if you will be able to come home at night to your home, or if that will be occupied when you get there.
And all of that is funded by that $3.6 billion that the United States sends to Israel annually.
Thanks for that.
Like Israel literally is a DBA doing business. That's what that is an American doing business as. And our outgoing president, that guy, that we riding with Biden, he says he's a Zionist. He's an avowed white supremacist. But we don't think he's a white supremacist because he selected Kamala and because he put, Ketanji Brown in the Supreme Court. No, he's still a white supremacist. How do I know? Because he said it. He's still a liar. How do I know? Because he's still lying. He lied Thursday, whenever it was last time he spoke. He lied. Remember at the beginning of this thing, the first time the Israelis hit a hospital, and he lied then. That wasn't the Israelis. That's probably that was the Palestinians. He's a liar. He's a white supremacist, and he's a Zionist. He said if Israel didn't exist, we would probably have to create an Israel, which is essentially what the United States did, because all of this was, this was important, for the role that Israel serves in geopolitics, right? We don't look at stuff that way. We literally we think this thing in very myopic ways, in a very myopic sense. This personal relationship with Masa. We literally think that there's this, and it ain't. This thing, this thing is a global terror. That's what this thing is. That's what this thing does. And what was the brother in Haiti? That Aristide. United States complicit in the overthrow of Aristide and his exile. Right. The Clintons got all kind of crazy back deals going on in terms of resources in um, in Haiti and probably the DR. But again, we're fooled because Bill Clinton plays the saxophone on on Arsenio,
Arsenio, yeah.
and so we think and we get fooled by these things, right? In the midst of his foolishness, while he's cheating on his wife in the White House, we say stuff like they all do that. They only coming after him because he's favorable to black folks. And so like we've come up with this very skewed way even of looking at, immoral behavior. When black folks or anybody else that we like get in trouble, we be okay because we'll be like, everybody else doing it, they just coming after him. So we're not really bothered by the offense. We're bothered by our guy getting caught for doing the same thing that we think white folks do otherwise. It's wrong. it ain't wrong because our guy got caught. It's wrong because it's wrong. Right? And like some of these same things that folks, have distaste and disdain for Trump, these same things we done heard about Biden. Biden's has poor personal boundaries. There's a litany of things written about the manner in which he invades women's space. And just like he has, a history of saying things crazy off color remarks as a vice president, he was already doing that and saying, slick things to women. He's offensive then. Bill Clinton, the same, right? But because they our guys, we good with that, right? But we don't like Trump. And we shouldn't like Trump, but we shouldn't like them either. But we do, we like them. And I'm not saying that we didn't have to vote our interests. I am saying is that we just need to understand it as that we're voting our interests, that this is a transactional relationship. And this is where we get caught up. We get caught up in the person. And so this is where you have, we have this very, very, very dangerous interaction between our xenophilia, and our tendency to move toward, and our identification with the aggressor. Our threat matrix is off. That is a part of our trauma piece. We are forever looking for good white folks because we are forever seeking acceptance
And validation from
yes.
from an individual that is diametrically opposed to your well-being.
It's almost impossible for that individual to move in that direction. Right. And then even when we look historically at those folks who have allegedly worked on our behalf, at best it's been paternalistic. At best. Right. And then somebody will be like, well, what about John Brown? Okay, so that's one, literally a 1 in a million. Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah. So as you bring that up, and we typically don't undertake in trivial conversation and actions. But we may segue from that just a little bit because I guess Mike Jones is not here today. But when you look at those actions, but everything that you just described can be embodied in the U City Hero, Nelly, and Rick Ross, and certainly Calvin Broadus, all man, Snoop Dogg. And I use that tongue in cheek because I have never been a fan of this guy, his stance, rhythmically, his flow, of course, is sick. But this man has been an enemy to our community from day one. We continue to celebrate this clown. Now he almost has his crazy uncle phase where that's just Uncle so and so. And these people are killing us. I have one of my partner's son was on The Voice this season. So I was watching this. So I watched The Voice, and I watched just how this man went out of his way to minimize the achievement of Black folks that leave on his team. This guy is an enemy of ours. He's a microcosm. This past week, there were two things that made one made national headlines in our community. There was this young sister who had been, in my opinion, exploited by a church, and they recorded her through. They reported her begging as the church's partner. If you're familiar with Orthodox Black churches, there's a time in the service where you can almost make a reclamation or ask for an apology from the church body based on some behavior that you may have engaged in that is, an affront to the teachings that you're supposed to church. Well, yeah, I've got varying opinions of number one. But the young lady was apologizing to the church by becoming pregnant. This yeah, terribly misled pastor, uh, you know, chastised her. But at the same time, Rick Ross was over, and one of them, I saw videos of from in African countries reciting the N word repetitively to natives of Ghana. I told you N words that they were N word. And I do not know. And so the question that rolls in my mind is, would I rather be subject to this ignorance that this man's broadcasting internationally, or would I rather be subject to the ignorance in this church? And to be honest with you, they both struck me as just entailed in the heart of any sort of improvement in the community.
These these are the things that we're looking at. These are the things. Well, these are the things that we should be looking at. And but our ability to kind of look critically at these things is limited because we don't always have an appreciation or an understanding of the context. Like very simple things, like it just can't be that so this is all these people who so that you name Snoop, da 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 da, and I'm gonna throw another one in there, Al Sharpton. It can't be that these people are on TV all the time and they be serving the needs of Black folks, because that's not how this works. We have to clearly understand that somehow or way these people are compromised. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in front of you. That's it. That's all.
That's it. That's all. And that's a litmus test for all of us.
Yes. And Al Sharpton gets to be on TV talking about social political things on NBC's Dollar. So clearly he ain't saying nothing. He ain't saying nothing that upsets the status quo. Otherwise he wouldn't be there.
Right, right.
And so he would so there's nothing progressive about what he's talking about. There's nothing progressive about what anybody on MSNBC is talking about, period.
At all, progressive nor correct half the time.
But we think it is so, right? We really believe that them black folks that they pay to show up on MSNBC and CNN, that they are talking truth to power or whatever because they exist at all. They are allowed to be there because it makes us feel better.
And our eye and the Nielsen ratings love our eyes. We are an incorrect, we over-index in everything that they want.
And so, because we are starved for, I mean, because for us, that represents achievement. Him on there accrues to us, right? That's how we perceive it. And I believe that in a social psychology paradigm, there's probably certainly some things that would speak to some correlational relationships in that regard. But politically, socially, and politically, at the individual level, we don't really get nothing out of that. In mass, we don't, and so, but and I'm not saying we don't need to see Black images. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to be thoughtful about the Black images we're seeing. And so, of all of the images you could have, of all of the people who could be doing whatever, how is it that Snoop has ascended to being on TV literally every day? I mean, so you got to think critically about that. Like, why that? He ain't the hottest person even in Black entertainment. I mean, he is because he's ascended to that for them, but he ain't. He's serving a role.
Absolutely. Well,
So it's our job to kind of figure out what that role is. Like, so what's the consequence? What are our implications for Snoop, Black America's front man?
Well, the minstrel's role has always been the same. It's to make, white America feel comfortable. And if in fact you can do that and give them a peek of our culture at the same time, you've done your job. So, I mean, I think that is it because there's no other way you would listen to someone whose major foundation is the total annihilation of someone that looks like him and the dissemination and the total disrespect of, women that look like his mother and the total, eradication of individuals by his product, cocaine or whatever it is. So, there is no gravitational pull to that of anyone that's sane outside of all race, unless you think you're getting something else with it. So, and of course, they love those things too. I mean, I shouldn't say that because they are the major well, advances of those things. They love all of those things. In fact, now that you look at it, getting high, misogyny, uh, yeah, the winner take all situation by any means necessary. That lines up with it. And if you say it correctly and you prove, I guess that it is a match made done. So yeah, he's I see I see why they're with him.
And so we have to be aware of these things. I mean, because again, it's not any different. It's just a different sector, right? So if we could be, so we're vulnerable to a Snoop, we're vulnerable to an Al Sharpton, we're vulnerable to a Hakeem Jeffries, and because we're vulnerable to those folks, we end up with a Wesley Bell. All of that is the same thing, right? So, and so who I believe is now, so at first Hakeem Jeffries had taken the most money, but that race in St. Louis, Wesley Bell takes the most, Israeli money. Um, and so this is what Black folks are beholden to in in St. Louis, and this the Israeli the Jewish lobby, and this is what Black folks are vulnerable to across the nation, because most of those folks in Congress are taking that money.
And
And so
they're getting immediate return on their investment. I'm not sure if you sent that or it was from another feed that I received. Uh, Lil Wesley has already sided with the Republicans and supporting Israel in one of his first votes
yes,
as he goes to Congress. So that the return on their investment is yielding immediate uh, benefits. And so, yeah, that seat no longer belongs to Black folks. That is an Israeli seat in the first congressional district in the East.
yeah,
It's a great state of Missouri.
yeah, and so um, St. Louis infrastructure dollars are going to go to. They're going to end up in Israel because monies he could be working for to bring to St. Louis are going to be he ain't gonna think about it. And he ain't gonna have to think about it. Because if he's on TV enough, Black folks gonna be happy, regardless of what his voting record is. So when they see him pictured with whoever they assume or presume to be powerful, they're gonna be satisfied. And then those who have personal access to him, they're clapping their hands because they get to be next to him, regardless of what he's doing from a leadership perspective. So those folks who get to show up and be in the same room as him, have their profile elevated, or their sense of self reaffirmed because of who they are in proximity to him. All of that exists at the at the expense of the common Black person in St. Louis, and so so again, this is kind of what we're looking at, and this is so this kind of stuff, like when we're trying to in our constant conversation about have we to what degree have we really moved on? We're in from a I would say from a strategic and operational point of view, we're in the same space that we were in, at the time of Malcolm's assassination, at the time of King's assassination. That and really any of those social critiques that were written by James Baldwin. It's like we are still othered, which ain't gonna never change. That just is what it is. We have a pretentious class of Black bourgeoisie, and our leadership is compromised because either it is picked by white folks or we pick people who white folks like, which is still de facto white folks pick them. So, but even when we send them forward, we send somebody that we think gonna look good for Mr. Charlie.
That's right.
Not because they are competent leaders. Right. And so this race in St. Louis is very much indicative of that. It's like they don't like the aesthetic. They don't like the optics. They don't like who Cori Bush is, regardless of how productive she was. So they wanted somebody who could clean up nice.
They thought cleaning up nice. The respectability politics reigned supreme.
And so this respectability piece is a thing, right? And again, we could get so, our thinking on this could be, so concrete, so who you want to represent. I want the best representative. I don't want the best representation. That's not necessarily what I'm looking for. And when I say representation, I mean the best image, right? I want the best representative. I want the person who actually does the work, that has the ability to do this, that, or the other, who has the ability to go identify the needs of the community, go get those resources, bring those resources back to the community. And from best I can tell, Cory Bush did that. And so why throw this Hail Mary to this guy other than he talks different, right? So he talks different and allegedly is better educated and all that kind of stuff. And so, but that's what a set of us, that's what we want, right? And so, but all of this happens in the context of the belly of the beast. So, this is what, again and again, this is what the struggle looks like. This is how it manifests for us. This thing, we have to know that this is like we're literally fighting programming and brainwashing on a daily basis. The propaganda. We need to consider Snoop as propaganda. That for whatever reason, he's on TV every day. It cannot be good for the masses. We got to think of it that way. That this is some form of propaganda. This is some attempt at mind altering.
That's it. There used to be a time in hip hop where you were criticized for overexposure. And yeah, I can remember MC Hammer being criticized for the cartoon movie and some other folks because the authenticity of it had been compliment, so we say. And but now it's the exact opposite. It's a money grab around the way, and it's a total money grab, and you are 100% right in your assertion that as long as you get the bag, the end justifies your means.
As long as you
And
get the
that's
bag. And,
and,
and many of us, we end up so excited about that. Like it I don't know who else benefits from it, but people believe we benefit from it, right? And somehow or another it works because somehow or another Snoop he moves the needle, so they get what they want. Allegedly, black folks get what black folks want. Allegedly, I don't know what that is, other than he's on TV. I don't care. I don't understand. I don't understand the trade. And so, but that's what we are. But that's how. I mean, it's like black folks was mad when Jason Kelsey or whatever, Travis Kelsey, with Travis Kelsey, Negroes was actually excited because he was dating a sister. Then got mad because he left the sister to get with Taylor Swift. We crazy. How could we be excited? Why was that exciting to black folks that he was dating a sister? That was exciting to black folks.
We have just been given an official clinical definition by Dr. Charles Alexander. We are crazy. We are, that diagnosis is crazy. Let me ask you this, Doc, as we wrap it up. I want to be judicious with your time, and this very special weekend for you as well. Where should we go from here? And there's a. I looked for my book. Where do we go from here? Community of Chaos. I couldn't find it before I left my library this weekend. But where should we go? Having every issue that you spoke about. dealt directly with all the underpinnings of Dr. King's leadership. Where do we go from here?
I mean, and really, kind of what he was talking about in that book is that it's really about us being able to center again who we are and where we are and what that means. There's only a certain kind of way that we can manage this thing. And that way is to understand this thing that we have to manage. And I'm not really trying to be confusing. It's really, and I'm not trying to minimize. It's like, we gotta appreciate that the United States as an entity is what it is, and it does what it does. There's no reason to believe that all of this foolishness that the United States does abroad, that it doesn't do it at home. It is necessary that it wreak the same havoc here as it does abroad for the same reasons that it does it abroad. And that is to rest and maintain control. And so we think that we have, actually more rights and more choice than what we do. Right. Because of consumerism. And so we will trade and have traded, our relative rights for consumerism. So as long as we can buy whatever we want to buy, wherever we want to buy it, and wear it wherever we want to wear it, or use it, whatever, that we can consume whatever we want to consume wherever, and from whomever we want to consume it, or to purchase it from, and then consume it wherever we want to consume it. We're kind of good. That's the limit. That's like the max for us in terms of our rights. That we can consume whatever, whenever, and however. Meanwhile, unless we live so the further away we live from white folks, the less infrastructure we have. In every sense of the word. And we don't care as long as we can move closer to white folks.
What's just as astounding is that we're care with them being in charge. We're cool with them being in charge every day of everything that we have. They're in charge of your water supply, your electricity supply, your internet supply, and not once have I in the last, I don't know, ever heard a politician say we need to seek control of that for ourselves in these things.
And so so that's where we go. Where we go from here is that this kind of is the understanding of what the situation is and how we have to intentionally behave, because otherwise we're literally just being moved by the propaganda. Right? Snoop is propaganda. Nelly is propaganda. Rick Ross is propaganda. Kanye West is propaganda. All of these entities are propaganda. We got to figure out the whys. We know what the easy why is. They're trying to move us. And so why is that in our best? Why is that in our best interest or not? That always has to be a conversation. And then we have to, again, create our critical mass and move against whatever is not in our best interest. And we got to stop waiting until the worst possible case before, we come together to do whatever. Right? So like that energy that we saw around the assassination of Mike Brown, that energy that we saw around the assassination of Big George, We got to have that energy about things, you know, other than the worst case scenario. We got to have that energy around, you know, funding public schools. We got to have that energy around, to your point, you know, who controls our waters. Like, is Flint any better? So just think about all the little pastors who did photo ops about the pallets of water that their churches sent to Flint. Is Flint better? Right? You know, and it, you know, the crazy thing about Chicago, you have all kinds of pallets of water being shipped from all of these clowns in Chicago. Chicago got more lead pipes than anywhere in the country. They was shipping pallets out of the south suburbs. All these churches sending pallets out of the south suburbs and in Phoenix and in Park Forest, you know, those two south suburban communities. Their water don't even work half the time. Park Forest always has boil orders, you know, like monthly, you know, bare minimum, quarterly. They have them boil orders in Park Forest. They have, you know, the water be shut off in Phoenix because the water mains are terrible. They need a total gutting and rebuilding of their water infrastructure in Phoenix, Illinois, which is, you know, right next to Hardin, right? And so that's what we need in the way of, you know, leadership that actually talks about and addresses our real infrastructure issues, you know, those things that really, you know, are at the heart of what our people need. Because the facts of the matter is that clearly your resources are as good as your proximity to white folks.
No matter what your income is,
No matter
that
what
is the
income.
case. And that's in education, and that is in home, that's in healthcare, the whole nine. And we have got to deal with it. Dr. I appreciate that. And I think those are the issues that came with raised to this day. I think those are the same issues. So, you know, like I said, we want to be judicious with your time, and we want to thank you all for tuning in. And if the Lord's will, we say the same. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for tuning in to the Legacy.